Brooks Running has a new shoe for you runners out there. Did you hear that? Better turn up your volume. In fact, turn it up to the max. Introducing the all-new Ghost Max. It's got all kinds of things to make your knees and ankles feel protected, like Max Cushion, Max Soft Landings with DNA Loft V2 foam, and Max Smooth Rides with their Glide Roll Rocker. Feel better on your run with Ghost Max. Learn more at brooksrunning.com.
Why take one vacation with the family when you could take all of them? With Royal Caribbean, you don't just go to the beach. You visit a private island and race down the tallest water slide in North America. You don't just go for a road trip. You ATV and zip line through the jungle. You don't just go somewhere new. You rappel down waterfalls and discover ancient temples. Because this isn't just any vacation. This is all the vacations. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you?
All is good. Just about to set off we're recording this Sunday morning, and my timetable's now got me teaching at 9 o'clock on a Monday. So that means I have to set off for work on a Sunday, which is a bit of a bind, but I'm like Tigger. As soon as I get near the classroom, I'm bouncing off the wall, so really looking forward to it.
As soon as that alarm clock goes at 3 o'clock in the morning, Kieran, you're bouncing off the... We're all globetrotting today, Kieran, so I'm off up to Birmingham to see my wife who's on tour. How exciting is that? And that's lovely. We're also very excited, Kieran, because we spoke to Steve Lamacq the other day.
We did.
There's a new podcast joining our stable, The Price of Music, hosted by Stuart Dredge and Steve Lamacq, and we had a very exciting time talking to them. And our lovely listeners can hear a taste of what that pod's going to be about. But Steve Lamacq clearly has some very good... Steve Lamacq is clearly the accountant of the music world. The one to whom the interesting things happen, Kieran.
He certainly does.
And
none
also,
of which can be repeated, of course.
Of course, yeah. And also brilliantly, he named a couple of bands that we both nodded away sagely. Oh, yeah, of course, yeah, of course. It's Questions Day, Kieran, but we do have a couple of news stories, one of which, in our normal fashion, occurred about 25 minutes after we said goodbye to each other last time. I'm not sure, Kieran, whether this story about Joe Lewis and Spurs, I'm not sure if this is a big story or a huge story, because none of the media reporting it seem to be able to agree as to whether or not he still has any involvement in Tottenham Hotspur.
Yes, this is very strange. So Joe Lewis, who owned the vast majority of a company called ENIC, which in turn owns the controlling interest in Spurs, he was charged with naughty behaviour, with insider trading by the US authorities a few months ago. And I quote his lawyer at the time: "The government has made an egregious error in judgment in charging Mr. Lewis, an 86-year-old man of impeccable integrity and prodigious accomplishment," said Lewis's lawyer, David M. Zornow. "Mr. Lewis has come to the US voluntarily to answer these ill-conceived charges, and we will defend him vigorously in court." Blimey, well, that's showing it to the man, is it? So he's now pleading guilty. So I don't know why the lawyer said those things. Perhaps it was just lost in translation somewhere. And in terms of this insider trading, the accusation is that Joe Lewis had access to information relating to some successful companies, and that information was not in the public domain. So, for example, let's say that you're running a company and it's got a new drug or it's got a new product which is going to be absolutely fantastic, is going to make a fortune. You cannot trade shares on the basis of that information because it's not in the public domain. The accusation is that Joe Lewis instead of giving bonuses or tips to some of his staff, such as pilots, people that work for him, one of the guys he plays poker with, and and the word assorted lady friends. I don't know what that means. I don't know what assorted means. He gave them this information, and they were able to make substantial money on the back of that because the price of the shares went up. So Joe Lewis also transferred his shares in ENIC to a family trust. And at the time, Spurs said, well, this is just a bit of succession planning. He's 86. We've already said there's no change of ownership. Don't get it, nothing to get involved with. And people are now going, actually, is it because he knew what was coming in terms of the insider trading? And he's now trying to distance himself. So Spurs are now saying, Joe Lewis, never heard of him, nothing to do with us, Gov, and so on. Why is this of importance? Because ultimately, to date, it's just a bit of tittle-tattle, for us to start off the show with. Well, I think the big issue is that there's been a number of football clubs that have been up for sale, either explicitly or word on the street. And Spurs went from being word on the street up for sale to nothing's happening. And the reason for this, possibly putting 2 and 2 together and perhaps reaching 5, is that Spurs effectively took themselves off the market because they probably realised that anybody who was serious in making a bid for Spurs would have to do some due diligence. And as part of that due diligence, they'd lift the carpet and out would come crawling these insider trading charges and the way that was going forwards. So now that is very much a case of Joe Lewis pleading guilty, I think it's fair to say that Spurs are in the game in terms of being a club available for sale. We don't know what the intentions are of the people in charge of the trust. But one of the barriers to a Spurs, and I think they're an incredibly attractive proposition myself, one of the barriers is certainly lifted.
That, as you say, the assorted lady friends, slightly sordid expression. It's like this 86-year-old going in, it's like a pick and mix. There's like a female pick and mix. He arrives somewhere in the Caribbean on a Friday night. He's got nothing to do. His poker mates away because he's put in money in the shares that he's tipped him to buy. So he'll just get some assorted lady friends and he'll bore the arse off them with his insider tips, basically. But as you say, Kieran, before I ask you the important question, because we're on a financial pod, which is how much Tottenham will be worth if somebody does try to buy it, if it is on the market. But people have been joining the dots. A lot of Palace fans, for example, have been saying with 100% conviction that they know for a fact that Harris and Blitzer, this is the chance they've been waiting for. They've been waiting to buy Spurs. This is why it's all gone pear-shaped at Palace. But the two responses, I mean, as you say, the response from him, where basically he said, like Private Godfrey, it said basically, I'm awfully embarrassed. It's a terrible thing. I can only apologise, which is one of those press releases which says, okay, I thought I was going to get away with this. This is annoying. But Tottenham's response, as you say, literally shutting down it's nothing to do with us. He was to do with us. We're doing this press release very reluctantly because, of course, you're asking us. We wanted to go away, which seemed to me they were protesting too much, as they would say. But if Tottenham were for sale now because of this, how much? I mean, I presume. I mean, we talked about Palace being 250 million. Tottenham's got to be worth 4 or 5 times that, hasn't it?
I would say more. I mean, Chelsea went for 2.5 billion in respect of a stadium with a capacity of 41,000, which probably needs knocking down and replacing or moving to another location if Chelsea want to be competitive in terms of match day. Spurs have already been through that process. Yes, they've not been as successful as Chelsea, but then Chelsea's success was built on Roman Abramovich subsidising the club to £900,000 a week for 19 years. Spurs, from a business point of view, and I've said this every time, the best business in the Premier League. And therefore, my view is that I think we're probably looking at a price around about 3 billion. We saw FSG sell 10% of Liverpool for 300 million. That values Liverpool at around about 3 billion. Again, Liverpool have been more successful on the pitch than Spurs, but Spurs have done all of the hard yards with regards to the real estate assets. They now have potentially the most lucrative stadium in the country. Certainly, from a pricing point of view, it's right at the very top end, and it's in London. So Manchester United's valuation from Sir Jim Ratcliffe around about 5 billion. I would say that Spurs is 3.5. So if Harrison Blitzer had got that money available, then that's a separate issue. But there is no way that Spurs will be sold at a discount, because there's no pressure to sell. And as Sir Alex Ferguson once said, when negotiating with Daniel Levy, it was more painful than having the hip replaced. So Daniel Levy is a fantastic negotiator.
Yeah. Working on the basis, Kieran, that Palace are reluctant to pay £6 million for a Colombian right back from a mid-table Belgian team, I'm guessing that probably rules Harrison Blitzer out of the £3 billion for Tottenham running, is my guess. Probably Steve Parish can't afford it either, or will insist on going to be chairman of Tottenham. Who knows? You mentioned Liverpool, Kieran, and this is our other news story, and it seems there was a day last week when I think it would have been very difficult to walk around the centre of Liverpool without being ambushed by some kind of radio reporter with a microphone asking for details of their grief and their angst and their anguish at this terrible, terrible decision by Jurgen Klopp to go, a decision that the rest of the country met with. Oh, well, I wonder who else they'll get in. Clearly in the city that you're returning to, it's a much, much bigger story. It came out of nowhere, Kieran, it seemed. You may have more insight on this. And he still has 2 years left on his contract. So financially, is he going to take a hit here? I mean, I presume he can afford the hit, but do we know how much this is going to cost him to break his contract early?
It won't cost him anything. He's on an estimated £15 million a year contract, and worth every penny, in my view. I've worked in the city of Liverpool, on and off for 40 years. And he's achieved honorary Scouser status, and that is bestowed upon very, very few people indeed. The story broke on Friday at 10:26 a.m. I'd been given a heads up about it a little bit earlier. I think the word had got out. So I think what the club decided to do was to take control of the situation. By all accounts, he'd advised Fenway Sports Group in November that it was his intention to leave at the end of the season, but they were looking for the appropriate time. And clearly, it being a very closely guarded secret, it was starting to leak, and therefore, on the basis of that, the club did the right thing, because it makes far more sense to do it this way than for people with WhatsApp groups, Twitter, and so on to be leading on the story. With respect to his contract, and you're absolutely right with regards to the media response. I was out for a romantic meal with the Baroness on Friday night, and then I had that awkward conversation. We need to get home for 10:30 because I'm on BBC. BBC World. So she said, "Well, that's just cost you 2 more cocktails." I'm out of pocket. I'm out of pocket, BBC, thanks to Jurgen. So I from our business point of view, and that's the lens through which we should be viewing this. I did contact one of our secret lawyers, and this is our secret lawyer, who is the father to these two gorgeous baby girls, who I'm delighted to say we're now up to 1 kilo on baby daughter one and 850 grams. They're still on ventilators. God bless the NHS and everybody that's So we're sending all our love as before, of course. But I asked him with regards to what would the position be here, and he said that if Jurgen Klopp was going to take another job in England over the course of the next 2 years, then Liverpool would be seeking some form of financial recompense. But I think Klopp has said that he would never manage in England again. That they have agreed to release him early, and there will be some restrictive covenants, but under normal circumstances, that would be sort of gardening leave of no more than 12 to 18 months. But he also might have what we refer to as a carve-out clause in his contract, which could have been to say that, I'm Jurgen Klopp, I'm a proud German citizen, the opportunity to one day manage my national team. So there could be a specific clause that says, well, at the end of the Euros, or perhaps in 12 months. I genuinely think the guy wants to take a break. That he might be able to go and join a national team slightly earlier than a return to club football, if that's what he wants. So, the educated guess from our secret lawyer, it's that it's unlikely compensation will be due if he takes a year out, and almost certainly if he then takes the German national coach job.
Well, you say the German national coach job, but again, it's an indication of the way the mind of football journalists work, that there was endless speculation on Friday and Saturday. We say, he said he probably wouldn't manage in England again. He didn't say he wouldn't manage England again. There's a distinction between in England and England. You kind of think, well, unless he's only doing the England away games, I think managing in England probably covers England as well. I can't imagine any of your meals with the Baroness are not romantic, Kieran. Sure, that's a tautology, isn't it? I would have thought.
It's true.
They were remarkable scenes before he moved on. I don't know if you've seen those. I mean, those brilliant. The clip from a roving TV reporter who just happened to be on the streets of Liverpool, telling urchins that Bill Shankly had retired. And it's incredible. I urge anyone to YouTube this, because it's the most amazing glimpse into social history. But there was that sort of, there was a reminder of that in the response from Liverpool fans of Klopp going, and they must have known he was never going to be there forever. Anyway, it's a questions podcast, so let's move on to questions. This first question, normally I take producer Guy's word for it. I read the questions out. I don't do the research beforehand, because I want to hear the answer the same way our listeners do. But this one, this is such a good story. I did some research on it, obviously, as listeners will understand why. It's a brilliant story, and it's a brilliant question off the back of it. And I apologise in advance if this is the wrong pronunciation, Ties, but the question comes from Ties van der Zouwen. I'm going to learn Dutch one day, Kieran. I think it's a wonderful language, but it's quite difficult. I've got a mate who lives there. He's been out there for about 14 years. He's gone beyond hello and thank you, but he's struggling with the rest. He says, trouble is, he said, I sound like I'm a German talking Dutch, and I don't like that. But Ties has a question. Ties says, I have a question about Bram van Polen. This Dutch football player made national headlines here when he signed for his 17th year at Dutch club FC Zwolle. He included a term in his contract that all season ticket holders should get a free round of beer to celebrate the good news, which is, I don't know anything about Bram, but already he's one of my favourite Dutch players. He's gone right in behind Johan Cruyff. He's between Cruyff and Neeskens now. Already, he's way ahead of Bergkamp. To the best of my knowledge, Bergkamp's never bought anyone a beer, let alone a whole town around the beers. But Ties's question is, and again, I love football fans because of this. Because while we're celebrating the fact that everyone's getting a free round of beer, Ties wants to know who bought that beer for the fans. Was it a gift from Bram van Polen, and did he pay taxes on it? Or was this a forced gift by FC Zwolle? There's an accountant in every story, Kieran. Who paid for that? Who's paying for that free beer? You say it's free. Someone's paying for it.
Well, it does look like a contractual obligation. Now, what might be the case here is that Bram van Polen will have this treated as a benefit in kind and therefore be taxed if the club is seen to be giving the beer to the fans, assuming that Dutch tax law is based on a similar basis to what we have in the UK. And I think that's fairly universal these days, that benefits in kind are taxed. Alternatively, it could be that he has simply agreed to have a deduction from his salary in respect of the amount of the beer, and they might have sold it to him at mates rates. Again, potentially there's a tax liability arising here if it's at non-market rates. But it's a fantastic gesture, and even as a non-drinker, I applaud him. This is why we love football. It's things like this that make you so proud to be a football fan.
Well, again, there will be FC Swallow fans saying, well, my mate also supports FC Swallow, but he doesn't drink. Who gets his drink? I'm having it. I don't like to indulge in national stereotypes, Kieran, although I already did with the German-Dutch reference earlier on to an extent. I'd like to think that the Dutch tax authorities are slightly more relaxed about things than they are here. A bit more laid back. It's like, if you got it, pay it. If you haven't, don't worry, we'll sort it. But wherever this story is, Kieran, whatever country it took part, you'd like to think the tax people would go, let's not get involved. It's a brilliant gesture from a man. I don't know how well supported FC Swallow are. I can't imagine there are tens of thousands of season ticket holders. It's a brilliant gesture. He's buying the biggest round of drinks ever in the world. Let's not get involved in this. Let's just let him do it. But of course, they can't help themselves, can they, Kieran?
They've got a rule book, Kevin, and rule books have to be followed.
See, every now and again you revert to type, Kieran. You can be producer guy can talk about you as the groovy accountant as much as he wants. But every now and again, you're inner rule follower.
Why take one vacation with the family when you could take all of them? With Royal Caribbean, you don't just go to the beach. You visit a private island and race down the tallest water slide in North America. You don't just go for a road trip. You ATV and zip line through the jungle. You don't just go somewhere new. You rappel down waterfalls and discover ancient temples. Because this isn't just any vacation. This is all the vacations. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
This episode is brought to you by Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business. Want to advance your career or switch fields? An MBA from Carnegie Mellon's Tepper School of Business can help. Earn your degree from a top-ranked business school with a thought-provoking curriculum, one-on-one leadership coaching, support from experienced career counselors, and full-time, online hybrid, and accelerated MBA formats. Join the intelligent future. Visit cmu.edu/Tepper to learn more.
Now, we very rarely talk about football in Canada, Kieran, so I'm looking forward to your answer to this question, which comes from Matt Keep. And again, apologies, Matt, if I've mispronounced that. It's Keip, so I'm guessing. But Matt says, here in Canada, our Tier 1 league, the Canadian Premier League, is now in its 5th season. The owners of the clubs don't release very much information on their financials, and I'm always worried that the league is going to fold. The club in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Valor FC, is owned by the Gridiron Football Club Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and as they are non-profit, they have to release a financial statement, unlike the other clubs in the Canadian Premier League. The CEO of the Blue Bombers was quoted as saying what the average attendance needs to be for the club to be successful, and it's not being reached. As this is the only club whose financials are released, how much can you extrapolate about how healthy the league is as a whole when only one of the league's 8 clubs have to release their financial statements?
Yes, this did send me into a Canadian rabbit hole,
Oh dear.
which is unusual. As far as the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are concerned, and I didn't think that Gridiron was that big in Canada, but they've got revenues of 45 million Canadian dollars, and they're making around about a 10% return on that. And they're getting crowds of 30,000. If we then look at the Canadian Football League and Valor FC, they've got an average attendance of just 3,000. So, what are we talking? They're sort of, mid-tier League Two. But what concerned me was that when I went into greater depth from the Blue Bombers accounts, I found that it was owed almost $1 million Canadian dollars by Valor FC, and it's got so little confidence of ever receiving that money, it's just written it off. So if this is indicative of the broader position with respect to the Canadian League, and I've watched Vancouver Whitecaps myself, but they're in MLS as opposed to the Canadian League. And they've got a big ground and they get decent crowds. I think this is indicative. And we've also heard one or two rumblings at a national level in terms of a deterioration of the relationship between players and the Canadian Football Association. So just as here in the UK, I think there's a genuine concern that many other sports are being squeezed out due to the obsession that we have with football. And you and I are old enough to remember growing up as kids, it was football in the winter, cricket in the summer, and so on. And you'd still be watching, I remember, and we'd all be interested in the athletics because we remember Cram and Ovett and Sebastian Coe, and whereas it's now very much been marginalised. All of the focus is very much on football. I think the opposite is true in Canada, in the sense that ice hockey, gridiron, and so on, just like it is in the US, but to a much greater extent because of the nature of the much greater population in the USA. So it is a minority sport. It is fighting for airtime. It's fighting for oxygen of publicity, and that's reflected in the crowd. So unless the wages are so low, or unless the wages are reduced, I think that it's going to struggle to make progress, certainly from a financial point of view, and therefore that's going to dissuade investment in the sport. And remember, Canada is hosting, or part hosting, the 2026 World Cup, but there doesn't appear to be a lot of interest. The World Cup's still a fair way away, but there appears to be a lot of interest in it. From what we're seeing in the media to date.
There will be, Kieran. People, those games will sell out. Canada's a wonderful country to visit. And you mentioned cricket, Kieran. In an ideal world, at this very moment, you and I would be glued to the TV screen watching an unexpectedly cliffhanging cricket. But we're so professional, we're so dedicated to our lovely loyal listeners, Kieran, that we are rushing through some questions in the hope of being able to see it before we start our travels. Just as a bit of context, Kieran, the Canadian dollar is worth how much in terms of sterling?
I think it's about two to the pound. It's a few years since I was last in Vancouver, but I was in Canada for 3 weeks, and after 6 days, I was surreptitiously looking for jobs in Canadian universities. I've fallen in love with the place to that extent.
Man, and you don't drink beer. Imagine how much more you'd love it if you drank beer. It's like going to Holland. It's like you can almost hear the music as the barman says, which one of these 48 wonder. Have they all got special glasses? No. Conor McGuigan is a QPR fan, and as he says quite rightly, it's been a tough time lately for us, with having promotion hopes 2 seasons in a row that totally collapsed. Despite this, we realistically never had a big enough budget to sustain the promotion challenge compared to clubs like Burnley and Sheffield United, with us suffering injuries and having little squad depth, despite having 8-figure yearly losses. My question is, how much would we need to spend to get promoted based on past teams that have gone up without parachute payments, like Brentford, on average? It's always a certain sadness for me as a Palace fan. Kieran, QPR and Palace, you can see the links. They are London teams, but they're local teams within London, similar size, arguably underachieving. But I mean, there were a time, Kieran, when QPR were the team that were challenging Liverpool and Man United at the top of the old Division 1 and playing some great football. And it's not that long ago since they're in the Premier League, and their demise seems to be both sudden and slow at the same time. So can you give Conor any hope? How much would they have to spend?
It's not necessarily a case of, it sounds good, it's spending it well. if we take a look, I've got the transfer spends for sort of 7 or 8 clubs that have been promoted in recent years. Luton spent £7 million signing players in getting to the Premier League. Huddersfield, again, 7 million in going up in 26-17. Forest went up, and a lot of people talk about Forest. It cost them 12 million quid to sign players in the year that it went up. Brighton did it for 19, Brentford did it for 22, Leeds 46. Yeah, that's the only one where we've seen a substantial investment. And I suspect one of those two of those Leeds signings were made after the club had been promoted. So it doesn't have to be a large amount. Clearly, there is the challenge, given that you've got some pretty big hitters coming down from the Premier League. And I think we can park the separate issue with regards to parachute payments on those. But it can be done. The final of the Championship playoff at Wembley was between Luton Town and Coventry City. And both of those clubs were relatively recently in League One as well. They've both been through some really tough times, and fair play to them. Luton have started to acclimatise to the Premier League, and it's a tough place to go to, as I'm going to find out on Tuesday night.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been to Coventry for a long time, I have to say, but there must be somewhere big enough for a statue of Mark Robins to be put up, because the job that man has done there has been incredible. Tom Jones as our next question, and out of courtesy to Tom Jones, I did doodle loads of potential jokes off the back of that, but I seriously went through the whole lot of them, think, no, he'll have heard that. He'll have definitely heard that. Yes. Yeah, I'm not reading it because it is an unusual question, so I can't say that. But Tom has 2 questions for us, the second of which, at the end, made me laugh quite a lot when I read it for the first time. As Tom says, we've heard lots about multi-club ownership models and the advantages of player trading, centralised costs, etc. But with there being more questions about competitive integrity should 2 clubs with the same owners meet, I do wonder how much longer they will be allowed. I was also wondering whether a multi-sport ownership model might be better going forward. As far as I'm aware, in the UK, it's just Bristol Sport which does this, with Steve Lansdowne owning Bristol City, Bristol Bears and the Bristol Flyers basketball team. Would there be an advantage to, say, Manchester City taking over Sale Sharks Rugby Union, Lee Centurions Rugby League and Manchester Giants basketball? Could they spread central costs like IT and HR, as well as spending on things such as training grounds and medical services, in order to be advantageous for the football FFP? Or, question number 2, is this just a bonkers idea I've dreamt up after one too many ciders? 2 question marks, which was the bit that made me laugh the most.
I'll let you answer the second one, and I'll answer the first one.
Well, you better answer the first one first, because I don't think it is a bonkers idea, because it seems to me a perfectly logical idea, which probably means we've both had too many ciders.
Well, Tom, with regards to multi-sport, there is a very good case for having this as a model, because as an investor, one of the things you're looking to do is to create a portfolio and to de-risk your investment as much as possible. So therefore, and I think this to be extremely unlikely, should for whatever reason football becomes a tainted industry, a sport that people are no longer interested in, then having financial involvement in other sports does make sense. If we take a look at Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Manchester United, well, he also owns an investment in cycling. He's involved in sailing as well. If we take a look at many of the US investors in football, we've got FSG, who own Liverpool, but they're also involved in US sports. The Glazers, is it the Miami Dolphins? Stan Kroenke at Arsenal, he owns an NFL team. And possibly we're going to have 777 involved at Everton. Well, they're involved in British basketball. They own a 45% stake in that. And they've got other broader investments as well. So portfolio investing is a fairly standard practice, because you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket, because if that one basket is labelled Kodak or Nokia or MySpace, then its value can, for whatever reason, at some point in time collapse due to changes in market conditions, due to new technologies, whatever that may be. So I think there is very much a case for this. The downside, which is something which we were hinting at, a little bit earlier, and I appreciate Steve Lansdown's been a fantastic benefactor to Bristol Sport, full stop, is that they don't tend to move the dial in terms of the revenues that they generate, and they don't tend to be profitable. So what you're doing is that you're adding one loss-making business or non-profit-making business to your football club, which is okay unless personal circumstances change, and you then have to go and make a decision as to which one of these, or which part of this am I going to get rid of. So I don't think that they would make enough of financial impact, because all we're interested in this country is football. To far, as a football fan, it pains me to say I think we got it wrong. I think that it's a shame that other sports get squeezed out so much.
Yeah, unfortunately, that genie's not going to be put back in the bottle anytime soon. It's interesting, Kieran, isn't it? Because traditionally, across the whole of Europe, many football clubs also have basketball teams, handball teams, but they were started at the same time. So these aren't things that have happened as a way around FFP. It's just that when these clubs were started 50, 100 years ago, they were started as general sporting clubs. And it's just that over the time, that football has become the dominant power, isn't it?
Yeah. And I played for Trafford Rugby and Cricket Club, and that was very much the norm. And we'd also potentially have a lacrosse team as well, and so on, because that allowed when the club was set up. And my cricket club was originally the Vickers Shipyard in Manchester, and we were the works team before Vickers pulled out, and they bequeathed the sports grounds to the former employees.
There's got to be a Smith's B-side called the Vickers Shipyard, isn't there? But Vickers spelt AR rather than...
Yes.
That's a great euphemism. You must have sent that euphemism to Viz at some stage, the Vickers Shipyard, surely.
No, you got my mind thinking now. I'll get working on it.
A friend of mine, based in Gloucester, used to play for a handball team, and I was always agitated. I'd love to come along and watch you play handball. He resolutely refused to let me come along, because he said, I know what you're like. All you'll do is shout handball every time someone... and I went, I wouldn't do that. He said, you did it when you came to rugby, so I'm pretty sure... He took me to a rugby game and got furious because I shouted handball every time somebody picked. It's never not funny. The multi-club ownership, Kieran, as we discussed in previous pods, I'll leave a pause here for a lot of our listeners to go. It quite often isn't funny, rather than never not funny. It's quite a lot of time it's not funny. But the multi-club ownership deal... as implied by our previous question there from Tom, is something that's agitating our listeners a lot at the moment. And this is an interesting one from Adam Roper. And Adam says, on the pod, Kieran has explained the rules that prevent multiple clubs from being owned by the same person or even by the same company, i.e. Red Bull, and also about the 50+1 rule in the Bundesliga that keeps control in the hands of the fans. However, there are many instances where groups of owners have worked together for a common goal. Sullivan and Gold, for example, at West Ham, or where members of the same family own a club, Leicester City, Notts County, Man United. And also there are mysterious, says Adam, shady multi-club operations. If any Man City lawyers are listening, by the way, the words mysterious and shady are very much Adam's and not the price of football. Although I believe we probably have used both. So my question is, what legislation, if any, is in place to stop a group of 10 very wealthy mates going out and buying up 10 football clubs in the same division and then to all intents and purposes running them as a collective? Football ideology aside, there would be a concern here for gambling implications. And surely when a club can be owned by a third-party company, collective consortium, this must get so complicated that it's actually impossible to marshal. And again, I mean, what Adam's tapping into here, Kieran, is that as with FFP, people all through football are looking to find the various reasons why people might be trying to buy more than one club. And quite often they will put two and two together and, as you say, come up with five. But I mean, it's a legitimate concern, isn't it? In the same way that many people are worried about 14 American clubs being owned, or 14 Premier League clubs being owned by Americans.
Yes, and that was one of the issues. You know, if you have 14 American owners who are also, you know, socially connected, I think we would be in a very intriguing position and not necessarily beneficial one. We saw the Sneaky Six try to do something similar with Project Big Picture, which would have meant that there would only be 9 football clubs in the whole of the country which had votes in terms of how the game went forward, and you only need 6 out of 9 of those votes to carry any rules going forwards. If we take a look at the Saudi Pro League, and I was reading an interesting article about, you know, how good is the Saudi Pro League, and people say it's on a par probably with League Two in terms of quality, but PIF own 4 of those clubs. So there is a concern. There's also a concern from a gambling point of view. And I refer to one of our friends, the secret football manager, whose name I cannot indicate. One of our listeners is a secret football manager, or has been a secret football manager, who has managed overseas as well. And I was having a conversation, and I was saying, you know, have you ever been put under any pressure? And he says, well, yeah, one of the clubs I was at, on 2 or 3 occasions, the club owner would come into the dressing room and said, okay, lads, 3-1 defeat today. I've agreed it with the with the opposing owner, and you lost 3-1. So there is a concern. With regards to legislation, there are the problem we have is, how do you define mates? Because, you know, I can just imagine our secret lawyers who listen to the show, they're all shaking their heads at this. You know, it's very difficult. Certainly from an accounting point of view, there's a definition of what we refer to as a related party, and that is sort of very much, you know, hammered down. You've got to have control, influence in terms of owning a percentage number of shares, and then the links between the parties. You know, can they be proven? You can prove family links, you know, through from a genealogical perspective, but acquaintances, it's very, very difficult. So you couldn't have any legislation with regards to this. If you had an independent regulator of football who could act for the broader benefit of the game, then that's a check and balance. But yeah, we are seeing across in many industries, and you know, and I'm not getting on a political soapbox here, but in certain countries which traditionally you would hold to be bastions of democracy, the checks and balances that hold up democratic process are being taken down one by one, and it is a cause for concern. I don't think you could legislate against this. It would be very difficult, and therefore having some protective organisation, whether that's through, you know, fan involvement or fan protest. Remember, it was fan protest that took down the European Super League. We've often spoken about the level of fan organisation in Germany. It would have to come down to that to prevent such a thing from taking place.
So I'm going to spend the whole day now speculating about who the secret manager is. So you mentioned that they manage here and abroad. I can only think of 3 people. There's Roy Hodgson, Jurgen Klopp, or Jose Mourinho. So one of those is yours. Can't think of any other managers who have managed here and abroad. Yeah. Chris Swain, and this is, I don't know when Chris Swain sent this question in, but it's now become a classic pub discussion. It's about VAR, which we rarely get to talk about VAR, Kieran, because we're not a football pod. We are constantly reminded by the boss. We're a football finance pod, which I seem to be the only person in the country who think Newcastle's goal should have been disallowed against Fulham, because I don't care if it's deliberate or not. The ball wouldn't have landed at the feet of the Newcastle player if it hadn't hit the hand of the Newcastle player. So I'm starting to like VAR now, because it's given me enough, as much to get annoyed about as I used to. But Chris says, with VAR being the most accurate portrayal of a person's ego sitting in a box far away from the action, I like the sound of Chris's. I don't like the sound of his jib. I like the cut of his jib. I don't know what a jib sounds like. How long do you think it will be before a large club with deep pockets will sue VAR, in inverted commas? We all know that it will be the silver-tongued folks that gain the most from any such action. But is there a realistic price of compensation that could be chased by the aggrieved club? I appreciate this is rather an open question, you're telling me. And if anyone was successful, that would open the floodgates. Would this be shut down straight away? Or is there something in the rules that say playing in our league competition, then you have to accept any decision given by VAR? I suspect, Kieran, this is a question that's been discussed in pubs since 1888, but about referees. There's never been the option to sue a referee for a wrong decision. I think chaos and anarchy would ensue if you were able to challenge any VAR decision in the court. But we've had lawyers on the pod here and talking to us about the grey area between an assault on the pitch and an assault off the pitch, whereby 5 yards either side, if you punch someone, you'd be taken to court, and if you're on the actual pitch, you wouldn't. So, what do I know?
Well, this is a very topical issue because, Kevin, I give you Anderlecht versus Genk in the Belgian Jupiter League. There was a late penalty. The goalkeeper saved it. Kasper Schmeichel saved it. It was then tapped in by another player and a goal given. And then the goal was disallowed and a goal kick was given because the second player who scored the goal had encroached when the original penalty was taken. However, VAT failed to pick up that two defenders had also encroached into the penalty area, and therefore the correct decision should have been for the penalty to have been retaken. As a result of this, Anderlecht versus Genk is now going to be fully replayed for 90 minutes. So this is amazing. So this was a VAR error. My view on VAR is that as a result of VAR, we've gone from probably getting 96% of decisions correct by referees to 98%. So I have a degree of sympathy, and also, as I've said before, I used to referee myself. You give what you see. So, but in terms of Chris's question in respect of litigation, I think the only way that there could be financial recompense in respect of VAR is if it could be proven that there has been an act of negligence. Now, in order for negligence to be successful, and this is going from, I taught one law class in my life when one of my colleagues failed to turn up, and I actually had to teach negligence. So this is what I can recall from that class, which I think took place in 2004. So to celebrate the 20th anniversary of my one giving of a law class, this is it. First of all, there has to be a duty of care to the parties involved. Secondly, there has to be a breach of that duty of care. And thirdly, there has to be a loss suffered as a result of that breach. So does a referee stroke PGMOL via VAR have a duty of care towards individual football clubs? Probably. Yeah, you are there. You're there in a duty of employment to try to uphold the rules. Has there been a breach? Well, okay. Here's the issue: was it a deliberate error? Negligence is being careless. I think it could be argued that in the case of, and I think the most glaring one this season has been the Diaz goal for Liverpool at Spurs. Was there a breach? Yes. Has there been consequential loss? Potentially there could be. If Liverpool end up, and they won't, but if, for example, they ended up fifth in the Premier League, or they ended up runners up of the Premier League by 2 points, you could understand the agreement. There has always been, I think, from a legal point of view, the view taken by judges is that people give their best opinions from where they are. And for all of the critics of referees, I always say to this, just go and do it yourself. Just try it once. And if you get 100% of the decisions right, and both managers agree, and both sets of fans agree that you've got 100% of decisions right, then fair play. I'll take that. But it's an impossible job, and players cheat. Referees don't cheat. Referees are not corrupt. Players cheat rather than the other way around. So I'm not saying it won't happen, Chris, because it would open up a can of worms, and opinions are subjective. But there's so much money involved in football now. Never say never.
I used to referee the annual South London Comedians v North London Comedians charity match. Oh. And you think even a game being played between 24 mainly middle-aged men, it's quite quick. It's fast, isn't it? Also, but they used to get really edgy. One occasion I had to call Bill Bailey and Alan Davis to the centre circle and threaten to send both of them off if they didn't calm their team down. It was just like, there's a charity game. There's a charity game. It's free. Oh yeah, don't be fooled by that. The twinkle-toed sweetheart Davina. Also, I like that. I love Bill Bailey. He's wonderful. But I like the fact as well, Kieran, that you're such an accountant that you referred to VAR as VAT halfway through that explanation.
Did I?
You did, which made me laugh a lot. This next question, Kieran, bearing in mind that we both have a train to catch and hopefully the end of the cricket to watch, it is rather an existential, angst-ridden one that we have covered virtually, I think, from day one. But I'm happy to ask it, but I just wonder if there's a way we could keep the answer fairly succinct, because we could. I mean, this is a separate pod. This is a separate pod series, let alone a separate podcast. And it's from Jonathan Ricketts. And Jonathan says, do you think it's fair that clubs get a 10-point fine for going into administration? Often the owners who cause it have gone, the fans are then punished, and it feels like a double punishment. And if I can start briefly with my answer, Kieran, no, it's not fair, clearly. But so far, I've failed to come up with any other option that doesn't punish the fans.
Yes, it's a 12-point automatic penalty in the EFL. I'm in alignment with you, Kevin. I think it's the least bad punishment, because you have to look at the alternatives. The alternatives would be a financial penalty. Well, if you just put a club into administration, the chances are you might not have the money to pay that financial penalty. To give a financial penalty to the new owner, it means that you're not going to necessarily attract people, and you're dealing with a company in financial distress. Could you give a ban to the old owner who has put the club into administration? The answer there is a potential yes. But if we take a look at Al Young at Wigan Athletic, he was involved in English football for 4 weeks, and he's never been seen since. So he doesn't care. Mel Morris got his fingers burnt at Derby County. I can't see him ever coming back into football. Could you have a transfer embargo as a result of going into administration? Yes, you could. But again, that's acting against the club and the fans. Could you have a wage limit or a business plan? Well, you do have that. That's part of what the EFL do in respect of any new owner. If you have the threat of a points deduction, what it stops, and people forget that we went through a period in the early 2000s where we were getting 3 or 4 clubs going into administration a year, and they were often on the back of what we refer to as a pre-pack admin, where you'd put the club into administration, you'd stiff all the creditors, and then you'd buy back the club from the administrator 5 minutes later, inheriting all of the assets and none of the debt. And fair play to the EFL at the time. They said this isn't acceptable to local suppliers. We've often said that local suppliers will give a line of credit to the local football team, which they wouldn't give to other customers because they're either fans themselves or they don't want to be seen to be the bad guys in the town because they also have many customers who are fans of the club. So I think it's the least worst solution. The best solution is to run the clubs properly and they don't go into administration. But that's an ideal world, and we ain't living in one at present, are we?
Our penultimate question, Kieran, comes from Matt Collins, and I'm happy to ask this because it involves a particular bugbear of mine. Matt says, about 10 years ago, I took a university module led by Neil Doncaster, our friend, the head honcho of Scottish football, although I must remember that he doesn't like me calling him the head honcho. He doesn't say that on his door, apparently. But Matt says, as part of this university module, we had a talk from Paul Fletcher, MBE, who certainly did not let us forget about his goal against Leeds in 1974. And he stated that as stadia are pretty much empty 300 plus days of the year, future stadia would be built above other buildings. For example, on top of a Tesco superstore, the store could be leased to the retailer and the club would have guaranteed income all year round. However, looking at the Spurs stadium and other potential future stadia, it seems that teams are still opting for a different approach where they emphasise the fan experience and try to upsell and squeeze every penny from fans, tourists. My questions are, is there anything stopping clubs from building their stadia like this? How likely are we to see stadia built in line with Paul's prediction? And would it be financially viable? Now, the part that really annoys me is that stadium are empty 300 plus days of the year. And there's so much community stuff they could be doing on those days. But I think this is a really interesting question. I mean, it's Monaco, Kieran, isn't it? Grounds built on top of a multi-storey car park, I believe. But for the most part, it's very unusual to have a stadium integrated into anything else, isn't it? The odd jazz cafe outside at Reading, for example. Yeah.
Yeah. At MK Dons, there's a hotel which is embedded into the stadium. So we are starting to see, I think Spurs have probably got it about as right as you can, in my view, in that now underneath the ground, you've got the indoor go-karting. You've got the tour where you walk over the top of the pitch, and that's sort of been. There's a bit of Disneyfication there. With regards to putting the stadium on top of an existing building, as somebody that needed oxygen from getting to the top tier of St James's Park when I went to see us play at Newcastle, I'm not sure I'd fancy the walk. Yeah. And I think what would also probably action against this would be planning permission objections, and B, the construction costs would be so high because you would have to have your Tesco retail store with a roof which is thick enough to be able to deal with 50 or 60,000 people on top of it. And you can just imagine, you're wandering down the aisle at Tesco, and you're going, I should have got digestives, or should I go for hobnobs today? And then somebody scores a goal above, and you've got this incredible sound and people jumping up and down. So I just don't think that we've got the architectural skills at a cost which would be feasible for this to take place. But I absolutely agree with both you and Matt that football grounds are underutilised. We've had a groundsman on the show, and we know how protective they are of the hallowed turf, and we all know that the turf is hallowed. So how should there be utilisation? I go to Wembley now and then to teach. So clubs are now using the boxes and some of the facilities to increase revenues. And I think it's going to be an area that is going to attract a lot of attention going forwards. As it's a horrible phrase to use, as more clubs realise they need to sweat the property assets in order to maximise their income streams.
I think they'd probably close Tesco's down, Kieran, on a match day, wouldn't they? Rather than have 70,000 people jumping up and down at the top of it.
Tesco's would be happy though.
Oh, Tesco's would be very. Imagine the chaos on Boxing Day though, Kieran. Tesco's are starting their sale, and you've got a big. Palace fans have had enough stick for having a Sainsbury's at one end, let alone being built on top of one. And also, this Sainsbury's issue has been one of the many reasons for the delay in building the new stand while they came to terms with the legal implications of who owns various corners and angles. Our final question, Kieran, comes from John Benstead. And it's a simple one, but an interesting one. But John says, is there a rough estimate of how many fans need to regularly attend games in order for professional clubs in the lower leagues who don't receive much TV money to be sustainable in the long term?
Yes. John, I don't know who you are, but I might need to get your email address because potentially your name could be cited as part of a divorce which may take place. When I got this question, and I was as I sort of hinted at on a few occasions on the show, like many men of a certain age, I've got an enlarged prostate, which means I need to go to the toilet 3 or 4 times a night. So therefore, I check in on emails and so. When I read this question, I thought, I can only solve this using my spreadsheet. so this was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and the Baroness goes, "What do you think you're doing?" I said, "Oh, we got this question from this bloke called John Benstead. He wants me to work out how many extra season tickets you'd have to sell." And when I explained the question to her, she just gave me a look so withering. I was thinking, this is a wonderful relationship I'm in. Have I just taken it a step too far? But I have put the numbers into a spreadsheet, John, and I can give you the definitive average numbers of tickets that would have to be sold in order for EFL teams to break even. So if we start off at League Two, and League Two, in my view, is run reasonably well, you need to sell an extra 800 tickets per match.
Oh,
okay. Not too bad, but still, you look at the average crowd, we're probably talking, that's 20% increase. We move to League One, and it goes to an extra 5,000 tickets per match, and you're going, if you're Wigan, if you're the clubs, that could be quite a challenge. And we get to the Championship, and you would have to sell an extra 22,500 tickets per home match in order to break even, which is indicative of something we've said from practically from day one. The Championship is the clown car of European football.
I always knew you were a closet royalist. You never had an enlarged prostate until the King had one. There was not a mention of an enlarged prostate until... it's just... I can't remember who it was. Arthur Smith used to quote a philosopher who said, growing old is like being punished for a crime you didn't commit. As I said, we didn't sign up for this when we were 23.
No, we didn't. No.
We were talking to Steve Lamack the other day about the mosh pitting in the old days. We didn't have to go to the toilet every 40 minutes during a UK subs gig. What's going on, Kieran? As I mentioned, I think Wednesday, so Tuesday's time, that new podcast comes out, The Price of Music. Plus, it's prefaced by a 20-minute interview that Kieran and I did with Steve and Stuart. And if the podcast is half as entertaining as that 20-minute discussion, I still didn't get to the bottom of which of them was me and which of them was you, Kieran, but it turns out they're going for a different model. Rather than the expert and lovable idiot, they're going for two people who know what they're talking about. Thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that'd be very kind of you. And it will get you access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. I'm a bit paranoid, Kieran. Somebody said to me that when I say that'd be very kind of you, I sound like Boris Johnson. Which is really worrisome. I've been trying to find a way to say it in a different way. If you've got a question you'd like answered on the show, then email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And you can also go to priceoffootball.com if you'd like to buy one of our books or get yourself a Price of Football t-shirt. We will be back with the news on Thursday. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thanks for all the contact, gang. Much appreciated as always. If you want to listen to the show without adverts, I think it's as little as £3 a month on Patreon. So that's an option available for you. But I appreciate equally that times are tough for us all. There's various ways of supporting the show, and one of those ways is to give us a review. It helps the algorithms, it helps us in terms of when we're trying to get guests and so on, people read the reviews and so on. By all accounts, it doesn't matter, according to Producer Guy, What do you say? So you could even say you would rather have the show presented by Dr. Evil of the Austin Powers movie and Martin Gore, the songwriter from Depeche Mode, because any man who wears black nail polish in his 60s is a man to whom my cap is well and truly doffed.
Oh, Robert Smith and Martin Gore. Now we're discovering the truth behind the passion there, Kieran. That'd be a great one, wouldn't it? Yes, you had a great time at Depeche Mode gig, didn't you?
They were sensational, and a big thanks to the Derby County fans. I think I'd mentioned on the show that I tried to get tickets and failed, and one of our listeners who supports Derby very, very kindly said, "I've got a couple of spare," so I bought those tickets off him, and they were just brilliant.
Well done, that man. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.